Hey YouTube, what's going on? Adam here with Retro Repairs, and today I've got another quick repair video. So as you can barely make out here, we've got a copy of Mario Party 2 for the N64. Now I picked this up in a non-working condition in a 2-game bundle with Conker's Bad Fur Day. I think altogether it cost me about 40 bucks. So I've already got Conker's up and running, so we're going to try take a look at Mario Party 2. So we're going to do a quick test, see what it does. So this is all it's given me when I turn it on, no signal. So it's not getting any type of signal from the game into the system. And I got the same problem with the copy of Conker's that I was able to fix. So just as an example, I'll turn this off, throw that in, just so we can see that this works. There we go. So we're booting into Conker's Bad Fur Day. So let's crack open Mario Party 2 and take a look at what we've got. Alright, so opening these up is pretty straightforward. Flip it over, and there are 2 special security screws on the back. So if you haven't already, highly recommend picking up one of these, which is just a little screwdriver bit. They go by a common name of game bit screwdriver bits, and there's 2 different sizes, a bigger one and a smaller one. Bigger ones are used for consoles usually, and the smaller ones for games. So we need the smaller one here to open it up. There are ways that you can get around that, such as I've heard of cases of melting a pen tip to form around the screw, and just sounds like it would be a pain. So these are like $2. Just go buy one and make your life a lot easier. So looking inside, you see a little bit of corrosion which is transferred onto the plastic, so we're going to try and clean that off. This shielding itself has a little bit of corrosion to it, so that's something we can sand down, I think, and try and get that looking a little bit better. But otherwise, not awful. Let's remove these 2 screws here using a small Phillips screwdriver. Yeah, man. Now we can lift this shielding straight up. Pull the game cartridge, or the board out, and see what we've got. So, a very common thing with N64 games, I think it's because of this little plastic piece that sits in here, is this probably rubs a bit, and it causes these traces to break. I've repaired a few of these now, and it's always been the same thing with the N64. It's right around here, and if you look closely, you see all this white stuff? That's probably residue from something spilled in there. Could be mold, but most likely I think it's just kind of residue. This chip's pretty bad too. So I'm going to clean this up first, and then we'll take a closer look and see. I'm just trying to lift this out. I think this is stuck in here for some reason. Oh yeah, look at that. So that bent a little bit, but can bend that back. So something very clearly got spilled in here. So the bottom of this is kind of dirty and rusty, and right there. So we're going to clean the shell, going to clean these. One thing you could do for this, kind of just let it sit in some white vinegar and then just scrub it with a scouring pad or maybe some very fine grit sandpaper. Like this is 2500 grit sandpaper, and it'll take that right off. But we'll do that a little bit later. I want to focus our attention on the board here, get this functional. So first test that I want to do is a continuity test along these probes. Or, sorry, not along the probes, these are probes. I want to do continuity test along these traces. So what that involves is taking my multimeter in continuity mode, touch the tips and it will beep. So you follow each pin, find where the trace goes. So in this case it goes to ground, and we get a beep. Another ground pin, beep. This goes somewhere under this chip, so not getting anything. So let's flip this over. Try and get an idea of where it might go. So this trace runs up the side here, over in between these two pins right here. So if I flip it over and follow where that would go, it probably brings me to here or here. It goes through the board, so most likely one of these top two pins. So why am I not getting anything there? Could be a bad trace there. So I am getting something there, but still nothing. So let's do a little bit of further investigation. Holding a probe at that via, oops, just to see if I can get any type of, and I am. So from this via over to that pin, the third pin, I am getting continuity, so why no continuity up here? So we have a break in an unusual spot, and that's right there. So from here to here is getting nothing. So let's, I'm just going to try put a blob of solder in there and see if that fixes the problem. So to do that, grab the utility knife, scrape away the solder mask. Ideally, you'll do this with a fiberglass pen. You have a bit better control. I just don't have one right now, so I have actually ordered one. And also scrape up the trace a little bit. That will help to reveal if and where a break is. Okay, so we'll clean that up with some isopropyl alcohol and check it again. So let's try zoom in as good as we can. See if I can see exactly what is going on here. Kind of difficult to tell, but it looks like there could be a very small break in that trace, very close to that pin there, or that via. So let's just try once again. Maybe not. Break might be further up there. So what I'm going to do in this case is run a section of wire along there and just bridge this connection. There's a little bit of solder mask still on there to come up. Now grab my soldering iron. I'm actually just going to reflow this first. I probably should have done that before scraping up the solder mask, but touch it there, reflow it, run a little bit of solder on there. Just want to see if this happens to fix that problem. Still no. Almost drifting there. So let's run a little bit of wire between the two. So to do that, I've got a little chunk of wire here. I'm going to peel off 2 strands of this stranded wire. This particular wire I'm using is 30 gauge, and that's the full thickness of the actual sheathed wiring and everything here. So each individual strand is considerably less than 30 gauges, but use a very fine piece of wire, twist it together. We want to have it, I'm using 2 strands just so that there's a little bit of size to hold on to, make sure that the voltage is coming through the way it's supposed to be. And now grab my, where's my flux? Okay, so I have my flux here, and oops. Oh, there we are. So I have my flux here, And all I'm just going to do is, this is a really crappy flux pen, but just coat it a bit and take my soldering iron, load it up with some solder, and run the solder along the length of this piece of wire. So what this is called is tinning, and what it does, it puts a bit of solder on the wire, makes it easier to attach it where you want it later. Okay, good. So let's clean off that tip. And we're going to put some flux on this pad and the pin we're connecting it to. So now, this part's pretty straightforward. Going to take the end here, just tack it. I'm just going to put a little more flux or solder onto that pad. Get a nice blob there. I'm going to take the end here, tack it into place. Oops. Okay, now holding it pretty tight, I want to run right beside this pin I want to connect it to. I'm just going to heat up the solder there, let it melt, let it reflow, let it cool, and that's now tacked into place. Using my cutters, cut it as close to the pin as possible. And that is a replace trace. So I should have continuity along there now when I go and test. So take my probe, flip it over, and I go from the third pin in to, I think that was the second pin if I recall, first pin, and I have continuity now. So I'm going to continue the tests along the rest of these. Just want to make sure that we're getting a signal somewhere. If I discover anything else, I'll check back in here. Okay, so I've gone ahead and I've tested all of the traces on this board, and they all seem to work properly. So I think we are good. Now, what I do want to do quickly is just give this a bit of a clean. You'll notice all the residue, especially down here. We want to get that off. So what you do, I'm going to use a bottle of isopropyl alcohol and either a toothbrush or a Q-tip. Soak it in the alcohol, then just kind of give it a bit of a scrub. We want to get any residue in there that could cause further deterioration just up and off the board. It doesn't have to be perfect, but try and clean it up, make it look nice. While you're at it, good idea, just give the pins a good scrub as well. And then along this chip there was some residue. So let's give this a test. So I'm going to show you how to put the case back together. Oops. So with an N64 game, the chips always face the back of the cartridge. So I'm going to start with the front, get my two sides. You line up where this hole is, or this post here is. It should go through the hole. It won't go in properly, so you can't put them in backwards. Put that there. I'm not going to worry about that black plastic piece quite yet, as we're just testing. So let's, oops, there we go. So that's in there properly. Let's go try this out. All right, so we have our hopefully repaired cartridge in place. Let's see what we got. And look at that, we're booting up. And we've got some sound, so looks good. That was a reasonably quick repair. Albeit this one was in a bit of a different location than I usually run into problems, but let's finish cleaning this cartridge up and then put her back together and we should be all done. Okay, so a couple quick things I want to do here before we close this up. You'll notice right here there's a little bit of corrosion growing, and I had this on the same one of that Conquerors game that I recently fixed up too. So I'm just going to use a little bit of sandpaper. It's a very fine grit, 2500 grit. Use this for basically polishing paint jobs on automobiles. So just fold that over a bit and just try and get up any of that leftover stuff that you can. Give that a bit of a clean. There we go. So I am seeing exposed copper now, which is good. That was the point, but give it a little bit more. If you're having trouble using the 2500 grit sandpaper, you could go up to like 1500 grit or something like that. That should be fine. You don't want to use too much to actually scrape away at the copper underneath, but something very fine is going to be fine, obviously. Now, same thing right here. Let's give that a bit of a rub down. There we go, almost there. That should be good. So once again, just trying to remove any of the existing rust that's there. Now we're going to finish this up. So what I'm using is a bit of green nail polish and just going to go over top of anything that's exposed. Obviously not touching these connectors, but I'm going to put a whole bead of it just along where that little plastic piece would normally contact. Point of that, just adding a little bit of extra protection from condensation, water, pop, whatever you might spill in there, and prevents wear and tear on it. Then the same thing I'm going to do on this exposed wire that I recently just put on here, this bridge. So I'm going to put a fairly good amount over top of that all. The point of that is just to prevent it from oxidizing. And you can use any color you want. You can also use a clear coat. I just went with green because that's the color of the main board here, and that's what the girlfriend happened to have on her night stand. So convenient for me. No, I haven't told her I'm using her nail polish. All right, so that should be all right. Also, the nice thing with nail polish is it does flatten out itself, so you don't have to worry about brush marks or anything like that. It's gonna settle on there nicely and you'll barely notice it. So let that dry. I would say, I don't know how long nail polish takes to dry, 15 minutes maybe. I usually just leave it, come back to it later in the day, because you'd rather have this cure 100%, be rock hard, rather than try and put this back on and start chipping it up and then it just looks and feels terrible. So last thing to do for this is take a look at the case. So we do have some rust brewing right there. So I'm going to hit this with some vinegar, try and scrape up as much of this as I can, just to make sure that it's not going to spread and that it looks good to me. So I'm going to grab a toothbrush and some vinegar and see what we can do here. Okay, so what I'm going to do here, I've put these little shielding bits on a plate, and I'm just going to pour some vinegar over top of it all. Want to coat both sides, and the plate's just going to kind of help hold it all together. I chose a small plate that just barely covers it all, as I don't want to waste a ton of it when you don't need to. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the inside of this cartridge. So here you're got to be careful that you're not spilling and pooling the cartridge in vinegar as well. You don't want to overfill it so that it's going through those screw holes. Just want to let it kind of sit and soak in the vinegar. So I'm going to let that sit for a bit while I go clean up some stuff, and then we'll come back and see what we've got here. Okay, so that's been sitting about half an hour, and just want to show you what this does. So it's kind of tricky holding the camera with one hand, but anywhere you see the brown rust spots, it's just slowly coming right up, which is perfect. So that one's okay. These little black areas there, that's just from rubbing against the shell. That's not really a big deal. This one is going to be a bit of a question mark. I'm actually going to dump a bit of that vinegar out. I don't want it spilling over the shell. So it is definitely helping. I'm going to give this a bit of a better scrub using 2 hands and show you the result. So that's after a little bit of scrubbing and looking a lot better. Going to hit the bottom of this as well just to try and get all the grime and stuff out of there, but shells should be pretty good. I've also gone ahead and done the outsides of the shell. I haven't gone over the top yet, but obviously you want to be careful not to get the label wet. In this case the label's pretty terrible condition, so it's not super critical, but I still don't want to make it worse. But time now to move on to these. So I'm going to do the same sort of treatment with the toothbrush. Might have to take a scouring pad to it since it is metal here. It might take a little bit more as that's where the rust is actually living, but the vinegar helps to neutralize the rust and stop it from continuing. So let's see what we can do. Okay, so I've scrubbed that up a bit, and I also hit it with kind of a scouring pad like this, and it did definitely help. Obviously you can still see some darkness there, and that will be very difficult to get up, but that big spot on the front's gone now. And the vinegar has really, most importantly, helped neutralize the existing rust on there. So let's let this dry, and let's throw it all back together, see how it looks. Alright, so that's our cleaned up shell. I mean, obviously the label's still a mess, but this might be a candidate to get a label replacement, so I might look at doing that in a future video, but for now, it's going to stay how it is. I'm going to show you how to put it back together. So as you can see, the inside's looking a lot cleaner, a lot better. Let's grab our shielding. So, again, starting with the front, put the shielding in. You have to grab this little plastic piece. I can't count the number of times I've cleaned system and forgotten it, so make sure that you get it in, line it up on the board, and then drop the board into place, and everything should fall perfectly the way it's supposed to. Top half of the shielding, top half of the cartridge. Actually, nope, you gotta screw in the shielding, my mistake. So that's those small little phillips screws for this. Back half of the cartridge shell, and then the security screws. So once those are in, we are pretty much all set. So once again, for those of you that are going to ask, could I have scraped up the whole trace and just ran solder over it? Maybe. Having 2 easy points to solder onto made it a lot of an easier decision to just run a bit of wire over top of it and connect from point A to point B and just kind of bypass the existing trace altogether. But you can do it however you like if that's what you prefer. So that's a cleaned up Mario Party 2. So we'll test it, make sure everything's just working one more time, but otherwise that should be pretty much it. Alright, so after repairing, let's give this a try. And there we go, we have Mario Party 2. So I'm going to turn off the sound for this. So that is going to be it for this video. I hope that it was informative for someone and you might be able to use it to figure out what might be wrong with your N64 cartridge. Same idea will apply to really any type of cartridge games. So good luck if you've got something that just doesn't work. Anyways, really appreciate you watching. Leave a comment below. Let me know what you think. Hit that subscribe button and a like the video. All of those really help me get more views, and more views means more videos coming out. So thanks a lot, and we'll see you next time.